All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. And today we're going to be diving deeper into independent contractors. What can organizations do to leverage this ever-growing segment of the workforce? And how can independent contractors build a great relationship with the organizations that are looking to leverage this talent? And to get us started, we'll do a quick round of intros, and I'll start with Terri. Give us the 30 to 60-second intro.
Thank you, Cesar. Happy to be here amongst esteemed company. I am Terri Gallagher, founder and president of Gallagher and Consultants, and we have very deliberately set a brand around being a bit contrarian and disruptive and building out kind of next-gen contingent workforce and talent supply chain strategies, which is why I made such great friends with the other disruptors on this call. So I don't know what's going to happen.
It's exciting times.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the intro. I want to pass it on to.
Thank you for having me.
To Fitz.
Well, a pleasure to be here with some really smart and distinguished company. Fitz Ventura. I'm the co-founder of 1099policy.com. It's an insurtech that looks to provide incrementalized coverage to the ICs and thereby make it easier for those ICs to be onboarded and for the labor pool to grow. And that's after having spent 32 years in the insurance and risk management space, representing a whole host of staffing companies.
Thank you, Fitz, for the intro. Now I'll toss it on to Rachel, and then lastly John, and then we'll take it off from there.
Thanks so much. As my background, I'm from myBasePay, so I'm the director of compliance and operations here. Background in HR, so I would kind of see my role as the practitioner on the ground, actually having those conversations with the worker about, what does this mean to be an independent contractor? Also having the conversations on the other side with the client, letting them know, is this going to be an independent contractor? I know the rate looks good, but what else needs to be considered in there? And most importantly, building a process that can actually facilitate this arrangement for people, building it for what I say, designing it for defense, which is kind of cynical, but I always want to make sure that our process is attorney reviewed and attorney approved, because at the end of the day, those are the people who are going to have to defend it. So a lot builds into it. So excited for this conversation because these are a lot of experts with a lot of information on this topic.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for joining us and being here. And John.
I'm John Younger, and I can't think of anything worse than batting cleanup after three superstars are up.
Oh gosh.
So I'm no longer happy with you, Cesar. I want to go first next time. It's too much competition. I'm John Younger. Earlier in my life, I ran a couple of consulting firms and ran a couple of HR shops for big companies. I retired, quote unquote, 10 years ago, and do a little bit of investing and as an angel investor in startups around the freelance revolution. I write often, write books and articles about that stuff, and try to be the ethnographer of this wonderful period in time. I do some research. I sit on a bunch of boards, and I guess I'm on. I work for a number of companies that want to be better seen, platforms that want to be better seen by the global community. And I work part of my time at myBasePay, and I am really excited to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, John. And to kick off the conversation and help set the context, I want to touch on the recent research and survey that
Sure.
you did, where 45% of freelancers and independent contractors mentioned that companies know how to engage with them. So what makes, I guess, what's the secret sauce of companies that know how to best engage with independent workforce, and what's missing? What are some of the gaps there?
Sure, happy to share that. And you're right about the data point. 45% of folks in this global survey, and just background, it was about 2,000 folks in 30 different countries representing 77 different platforms. So a nice dispersal. And there are two things that came out. The first is, what is it that freelancers want? I mean, at the end of the day, freelancers want three things, it appears. The first is they want greater flexibility, autonomy, choice in what they do, where they do it, when they do it, etc. So you're going to hear 3 A's because I'm a former consultant and we sure like alliteration. So the second thing is agency. Freelancers want more impact. They want more impact of their work. They want to know that their work is doing more important things. They want to know that it's grounded and important to the client organization. And third, affiliation. It's a lonely thing to be a freelancer. You're not part of an established group. And so you've got to create groups. And it's very important that platforms, freelance platforms, provide a means for people to community that they might not have as independent agents. Example, I'm one of the 80% of freelancers that's not part of a platform. And so I create my community by doing things like this. Other people choose platforms. It's an easier way to do it. And besides, platforms provide the opportunity for work. And that takes us to what it is that people really care about. And you had asked, Caesar, what are the things that really create a relationship between a freelancer and a company that, or a nonprofit that he or she is working on? There are 6 things that companies need to do well. First thing is they have to have a clear theory of what freelancing or independent contracting is about in their organization. Mm-hmm. Is it just on demand? Is it supplementing key areas of capability? Or are they trying to create a more fundamentally flexible and blended workforce? It's very important that companies understand where they're headed in this area. When we talk about contingent workers, for at least me, I think the notion of contingency is the wrong notion because it implies that there's a real workforce and there's some other people that come on from time to time. But we know that that's not really true. And we know that within a world where people are leaving their organizations in less than 2 years, it's not like long-term loyalty is the biggest factor. Mm-hmm. The second thing that companies need is they need a very solid performance management system. Goals need to be clear. Timelines need to be clear. It's got to be very clear to people that they have an opportunity to give feedback to the organization as well as receiving that feedback. So first, clear theory of what we're using freelancers for. Second is very clear system of goals, measurement, management, monitoring, and two-way feedback. Third is a recognition that a freelancer isn't an employee. A freelancer is an independent business person that's created a relationship with the company. They have not turned into an employee, if I may put it that way. And so there's a different management relationship required. And so often in organizations, particularly young project managers, are just not that familiar with what it means to work with somebody who doesn't work for them, but works with them. Fourth thing, really important that they treat these folks during the time they're working with them as part of the team. There's some organizations that have different colored badges for freelancers than for other people. It's not a very comfortable thing to think that you're not able to go to that cafeteria. You have to go to another cafeteria. You're not able to listen into that meeting because some stuff is being talked about that, while important to you, you're not a real employee, and so you don't get the chance to be part of it. It's very important that companies not keep that arm's length relationship, but while they're working in the organization, treat them as one of their own. Fifth, there's some stuff that freelancers should not do because they don't have the relationship, they don't have the IP access, they don't have the history of the company or a knowledge of how things get done sufficiently to get that stuff going. So be thoughtful about the assignments that you give folks. And last but not least, treat them with respect, treat them fairly, and pay them on time. So 6 things. Clear theory of what we're doing when we're bringing on freelancers, very strong performance management system, teach managers to work well and appropriately with freelancers. They're not employees. Make them feel part of the team. Make sure that you're giving them work that they can do, that you're not creating difficulty because they're not a full-time person or because you're worried about sharing that information. And finally, fairness, respect, and payment on time. A company that does those 6 things is golden.
Thank you so much, John, for those 6 considerations. And I wanted to ask Terri how, well, first of all, how this podcast came about was because Terri made a very insightful post about independent contractors, and we were like, let's talk about this. So Terri, I wanted to ask you, like, what prompted that post for you? What was the I guess the mindset in publishing this post?
Well, and I love all the things that John said, and I'm going to circle back with that. But there's this whole kind of like, there's a massive shift happening, right? Away from seeing ICs as something to be avoided, and being risk managed. And now it really needs to be about enablement. So John's giving companies this blueprint of how to embrace these ICs. And the ICs are saying, this is the way that we want to work. So, the biggest thing is, we've got to move away from, like I said, the Microsoft permatemp thing that happened 22 years ago. And we need to move away from seeing this talent as a small part of your org, something to kind of be managed and fearful of. And we really need to think about, how do we embrace this talent and bring them into our organizations? Because this is where some of your best talent is sitting, right? The rise of solopreneurs, the great resignation. You've got people that are leaving their companies and starting off on their own. They don't want to be employees. So the whole genesis of this is, how do we shift that thinking to embracing this workforce? What does that look like? How do we move from risk management to enablement? And John had even given the blueprint about, don't keep them at arm's length. That whole tenure limit and the blue badges, and like, that's so over, right? Because we've really kind of shifted the way that this workforce is being viewed, and just sheer volume, the explosive growth of them. So the whole post was about, how do we kind of shift the way that we think? How do we move to enablement? What does that look like? And then the last piece is the agility of using this workforce, right? There's some very cost-effective components. Now you can really look at being agile and focus on specific outcomes. You can focus on just using, niche expertise to get things done. We've been doing this for years. We've been doing micro consulting because, I was a woman-owned business and I had no VC capital and I was broke. So I had to get really creative. How do I bring in these resources? We landed these big logos. And so I started figuring out, I can use micro consulting and use pieces of someone's brain and time. And it ended up working beautifully. And now it's like, emerging trend. And we've been doing that. So I think we just need to shift and how we look at this workforce. And the group here today, we're going to talk about how we can do that for companies.
Thank you, Terri, for that. And you mentioned something, going from risk management to enablement. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Fitz, given your background, with insurance and risk management. What are some of the things that organizations can do to, I guess, make this switch?
Well, first of all, John, I owe you a tuition payment because that was a masterclass.
It was.
Thank you. Terri's, I love listening to Terri because if you listen closely, before she even mentioned the word enablement, she was underscoring how to, which I think is really important here. It's important to the work that Rachel is doing. It's important to the IC. It's important to the ultimate buyer. And it's important to the insurance geeks that are charged with helping entities manage risk, because we do that to enable and empower the business unit leaders to get on with their business, right? And I was the outsourced risk manager for a large, very successful freelance management platform. And for years, they would come to me and say, and I'm going back 10 or 15 years, they'd say, Fitz, can you help an IC procure the coverage that they need for this one enterprise client? And in those years, the response was, I love you, but I'm sorry, absolutely not. That's such a micro transaction. And the efficiencies didn't exist to do that. So today, it's the convergence of tech and services that allows for the enablement that Terri is talking about, right? That she highlighted in that article. It's leveraging those things to meet the IC where they're at, to help them get what they need, in a way, going back to something that John mentioned earlier, that is flexible, that gives them choice, and that gives them autonomy. And so the role of managing risk is to manage that for the betterment of everyone. But let's not forget what the true purpose is, and that is to allow people to work, to allow the ICs to get to work, and to allow the enterprise buyer client to engage with that talent on terms that are also suitable to them. That's the importance of doing risk management well, not to stand in the way, to enable.
Terri, you I can sense you have a follow-up to that, or
No, I was just like, preach, like, these are my people. I found my tribe. No, the two things, programmatic enablement. That's like the two most powerful things, using technology to kind of enable the vetting and the indemnification and kind of the decision tree process. And then it's all about enablement and not risk management. Companies don't have 2 or 3 weeks while you go through the vetting process, only to find out that they can't be an IC. So that's it. That's just like, I just love that you said that, because that is where we are.
Yeah, can I jump in on that, Terri? Because there's a real specific example that I think will help drive that point home. We were recently talking to a national appliance manufacturer that has at any given day 100,000 tickets that are open that they have trouble closing. And they are challenged with a labor shortage, right? That's the environment that we live within. And the idea that clearing talent over a 2 or 3 week period is somehow acceptable or suitable. What it does is it has a significant detrimental impact on revenue and the bottom line, and ultimately that enterprise client's client, right? Which is waiting for that ticket to be closed. So I think that there's real value in implementing the tools that Terri is talking about here, so that we can be an accelerant to those desired outcomes in a compliant way.
now, one of the things that John mentioned, and then number one thing, it was having clear goals and clear outcomes. It sounds very, very easy to implement, but in reality, in practice, a lot of organizations get it wrong. And I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, why do you think this is? It's like, we know that we need to provide clear goals, clear outcomes to the ICs, to the on-demand workforce, but in reality, it doesn't really happen, at least from my perspective. And I wanted to throw it out to you guys.
Asking me or Rachel?
Let's go Rachel and then John.
No, I love what everybody's saying, because of course, these are the people who actually know what a COI is and know what these independent contractors are supposed to be. A lot of people who might watch this or who are stepping into this realm, they might have no idea what we're talking about, because a lot of the times insurance coverages, they'll submit their HSA personal medical card to me, and I'm like, oh buddy, we gotta take it back. An HSA plan or a medical plan, that's not the insurance I'm talking about. I'm talking about cyber liability, because you're an IT developer, and what happens if some hack happens, big things like that. So I think there's a lot of education, and that was one of the points that John made, is there's a lot of education that needs to happen in order for people to understand how we are enabling this to actually happen. Because a lot of people just think it's extra paperwork or it's extra cost, and they don't understand, why do I even have to get business insurances? This is a 3-month gig. It makes no sense that you're making me pay X amount of dollars. Nothing's going to happen. I don't want it. I think we're fine. Client says we're fine. We should be good. That type of arrangement doesn't necessarily fly with a lot of enterprises. And I think that's why a lot of people don't have those clear outcomes, is because it is complex. Compliance is always complex. And with this independent contractor classification, if you do a quick Google search, there's no black and white, yes, this is an IC, no, this isn't an IC. It's a bunch of different tests, and it's a bunch of different factors. The IRS says one thing, the DOL says one thing, California always says something else. So yes, it is complex. And I think that complexity either scares a lot of companies from even triggering into this workforce, because they don't even want to deal with the Pandora's box that happens if you do get it wrong and that misclassification comes up. Because then, taxes, I don't even want to get into all of the weeds on that part, but it's scary and it's complex. So people don't want to deal with it. And I think that's uniquely what myBasePay can offer for the temporary workforce, is the fact that we've digested all that complexity and we've built processes in order to enable that. And we're always constantly trying to stay not just up to date, but trying to get those workers educated and trying to educate our clients and the customers as well, about, don't just cut this off because it's a risk that your legal team doesn't like. If you cut it off because of the legal team, you're not going to have the talent and the skill set that you need and actually make your projects move forward. So it's a delicate balance for sure.
Well, and I want to add something to that too, is that this is, and along with this shift of explosive growth of ICs wanting to work that they want to work, right, the way they want to work, per what John said, there's also these other providers, an ecosystem popping up, like Fitz's company, like the myBasePays, that are using technology to expedite this risk compliance piece that no one really quite has a handle on, to provide a portal for these workers to come on board and work for companies. So there are solutions out there, right?
100%. John, yes.
I'm glad to join in the conversation. I think there are two sets of issues. I think that there are maybe three: cultural issues, philosophical issues, and then just technical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And Rachel, you did a wonderful job of describing the plumbing, which is really important for people to know, because if your plumbing isn't working, you got a problem in life, at home, and in hiring folks. We have another level of the problem, which is, once we get the plumbing straight, we sort of hit all of the old shibboleths about kind of, if you're not a full-time employee, I don't know if you're as competent. If you're not a full-time employee, I don't know if you're loyal. If you're not a full-time employee, I don't know that I can ask you to do some of these things, so I get confused. I would suggest that part of the challenge is that there really is a cultural shift from kind of workforce industrial, if I could call it, it's sort of the shift from the industrial era to the digital era, where people no longer have to live close to the location of their work, where people no longer have to work between these hours and these hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got four things that we've got to work on, I believe, in order to get people to get past the plumbing. One is, we've been talking a lot about reducing risk. The number one thing here isn't reducing risk, it's increasing competence. It's increasing the competence of the organization, where it needs it, when it needs it, how it needs it. Second, there's all this stuff about cultural alignment and loyalty and do you fit in and all that stuff. Let's focus, instead of cultural fit, let's focus on critical expertise in place. Because one of our problems as organizations is that if we're only thinking in terms of full-time staff, we can't possibly move with the agility that we need to move to make sure that we've got the skills that we need. Do you think that GM is having an easy time hiring AI specialists? No way. Who wants to work for GM? At the end of the day, and forgive me for being just that blunt, but at the end of the day, it's really important to remember that most employees are saying that they're open to another job within 6 months and they're leaving before 2 years comes around.
Mhm.
Third issue is we've got to move from that loyalty to agility. We've got to understand that the speed of change is so great that loyalty actually gets in our way. We want people to be loyal to projects, not loyal to corporations, because that's what gets stuff done. And last but not least, we talk so much about sort of filling in and completing the task of the team. Do we need one person? Do we need two people? Do we need three people? I think we have to start thinking not about filling in, but we have to think about transformation of that effort. How do we rethink the way that we get this stuff done so that we've got the best team, the best time frame, and we're working together in a 24/7 kind of a way. I'm very excited about the future of this stuff, but we're going to have to get past the plumbing is my problem into the real issue, which is rethinking how we approach the workforce. And that's a leadership issue, number one.
That's great, John. And one of the things coming up from SIA's Executive Forum in Austin this week, Barry, the president of SIA, was mentioning that there's a mindset shift happening where we're going from an input and process workflow to a more output and outcome driven workflow. And even though it's happening at a slower, steady pace, but that's where we're headed, right? And I think this is what you mentioned ties into that, and I can see it continue growing.
With one comment, if I may,
Yes.
and that is, we have an identity crisis in the freelance world, and the question is, what are we selling? Are we selling outcomes or hours?
Mhm.
And we're all over the place on that. Some platforms are saying, there's no way that I can warrant outcomes. I'm just making a match between a buyer and a seller.
Mhm.
So all I can do is offer a talent. I can't offer an outcome. Other organizations, other platforms are starting to, in fact, warrant outcomes and saying we're going to take some accountability for what's created as well as the hours that are spent. But Caesar, and I know the others have a much stronger perspective around this than I do. We've got to get clear about whether we're selling hours or outcomes as we move into the new world that you're describing, and we're not clear yet.
Mhm.
Fitz, Terry, Rachel, any thoughts or follow-ups on?
Well, I would love to kind of add to that too, right? So I think some of the confusion is, federal and state agencies are way behind the curve, right? The NLRB has got, this whole task force to fix the co-employment problem. And the IC is like, we don't need to be fixed. The Uber drivers are like, we're good. We like the flexibility, right? So you've got kind of these other entities that are trying to put structure and protections and social safety nets around this workforce that are just not aligned with the way that we work today. And so I think that there's also a big shift around, how do we continue to use this workforce with this kind of conflict around these other state and federal agencies that are still attached to an employment construct that's 200 years old that are getting involved. And I think that creates a lot of stress for companies. Where do we kind of fit? And to John's point, then, how do we leverage this workforce and how do we kind of bring them into our organizations? So these other entities are not where we are on this call.
Yeah, well said. Agility as a transformational trigger for significant paradigm shift, I think, is absolutely driven by the need for the work to be done. Hard stop, right? There are enterprise buyers, clients out there that have exhausted the traditional labor channels and are looking to these alternative channels as a matter of need. That, I think, has really created the opportunity to answer these how-to questions that Terri is so brilliant at asking. How do we facilitate that in a way that drives value to the IC, the labor intermediary, in whatever form or fashion they exist, and ultimately for the buyer. But it's that agility that I think has some real transformational potential.
And I want to add something here too, to kind of like, so I don't get hate mail, because I've gotten hate mail.
Oh my God.
The whole, ICs don't need protection. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we really need to kind of shift that social safety net to accommodate this workforce that wants to work this way. And what does that look like, right? I think it needs to change. And we've got companies that are providing like micro benefits and micro insurance. And so I wanted to add that before I get some hate mail, because that's really, I think that part's important to bring up.
I love that. Can I just add one piece, and then I'd love Rachel.
Have you gotten hate mail too?
None. I don't get any mail at all.
Everyone loves you.
It's terrible. I get pictures of my grandkids. That's as close as I get. But I love what you just said. And one of the things that is very exciting for me that you just pointed out, and Rachel, I'd love your perspective as well, is we really are seeing a very robust ecosystem develop around this, which is so wonderful. Yep. My favorite new one is Caribou. Caribou helps you buy cars if you're a freelancer. It helps you with the cost of the cars. It helps you with the terms, et cetera, et cetera. So we're getting very micro about this stuff. And one of the things that I'm very excited about, and this does involve myBasePay, is we're putting together a large group of freelance platforms and asking the question, what is the future of financial services for freelancers going to look like internationally? myBasePay is absolutely the right group to be, and obviously you guys need to be part of it as well. But it'll be fun to have this as a study group, getting 30 or 40 of these platforms together and really learning sort of what are the possibilities and trying to define the possibilities with the help of guys, with the help of people, not guys, like Terri and Fitz and Rachel and Angela and of course Caesar. So I'm very excited about that sort of activity as well.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to I'll step in on that one, because that kind of goes to the partnership that we're creating. So there is kind of a mindset where people want things to be simple. They want a one-stop shop to everything. And people just, as humanity as a whole, that's not really how we design stuff. I mean, look at our, our economies and our societies and our business models. We do like to specialize into individual little pieces. So it's about finding those partners, which myBasePay tries to be, which is to pull together the ones that we really desperately need in order to give our consultant the best experience. So consultants are always concerned about, that COI and that insurance. So that's why we have Fitz and his team to actually help not just give them an annualized policy like every other broker out there can do, but actually to talk to the worker and let them know what their options are. There's other vendors that we're talking to get people paid quicker than that biweekly or weekly turnaround time. There's vendors we talk to about how they actually file their taxes at the end of the year. What's that self-employment tax, and are they getting tax doubled, and all these questions. That is myBasePay. That's not our forte, but we are making links and connections in order to bridge kind of a concierge service. I always say that word wrong, especially with my voice at this point.
We knew,
but kind of just, that bridge. So it's not going to be a one-stop shop. One company is not going to be able to solve all of your problems, but that one company should exist in an ecosystem that has partnerships with people who can solve all your problems.
Well, and I think, Rachel, you use technology for that too. That's what we were talking about earlier, about to expedite and to kind of level up. It is about that ecosystem and being programmatic and using technology for that.
Exactly.
Big differentiator.
Log into one portal, and that one portal has, I guess if we did connect to that car company, it'd be like, hey, you have questions about your car, and it just links you right out there.
Now, I want to make sure we cover from the independent contractor's perspective, right? Especially with the Great Resignation, a lot of people are turning into freelancing and doing contract work as part of their I guess, reinvention, right? But the issue that I've seen is that a lot of them are new into this whole independent contractor in, contingent work. What are some of the recommendations that you would give someone that is getting started as a consultant or independent contractor in terms of how to have a successful run um, as an independent contractor? And Rachel, I'll start with you.
Well, that's not an easy question because unfortunately, they have to go to the IRS and they do need to just read the IRS tries to be in plain English, although taxes is never fun, but that's who you ultimately need to make sure that you got, your T's crossed and your I's dotted. So the IRS does have publications out there to let you know what type of taxes, and the most important thing is what type of tax deductions you can take as a self-employed individual, and making sure that from day one you get all of that documented properly. And some of it's not that hard. So, for mileage and cars, it's not as daunting as it has to be. And there's a lot of tax professionals out there that, yes, you might pay that tax professional a couple $100s, but then you write off thousands of dollars of legitimate tax deductions. So it's well worth it. So of course you have to do the tax portion, and then you do have to get the legal portion set up as well. So a lot of independent contractors, some want to be a sole proprietor, and that's okay in a lot of aspects, but there are a lot of advantages of maybe being an S corporation or becoming an LLC. And your tax professional, even though you have to file taxes differently depending on your setup, they're not going to be able to advise you on all the advantages of those different incorporations. So you do have to get to a lawyer too. So it is a team effort, just like anything, but it does not have to be, it doesn't have to be, a roadblock to getting into self-employment. It's just a couple conversations to get yourself set up correctly, and then to keep moving forward. Like we said, there's a whole ecosystem of vendors popping up to support people, from how do you get your own medical insurance? How do you get your insurances for your business? How do you make sure everything's covered? So.
Can I add to that? I'm going to take it up a notch, and I've got to say, before I take it up a notch, I wish I had known what Rachel just said about 25 years ago.
I'm with you, John.
So I want to give you a related context, because if I may, Rachel, what I think you're also saying is it's a business. You're starting something that could also be a bodega. You're starting something that could be a clothing store. You're starting something that could be a consultancy, whatever it is. At the end of the day, you are starting a small business called the business of you. And here are the things that you need to understand. First, you got to decide whether you're going to sole source. You got to decide whether you're going to join a platform, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really important when you do that to decide that you've got to generate your work. Platforms can bring opportunities to you, but there's no assurance. There's no reasonable likelihood that you're going to actually get all of that stuff. Only about 10 to 20% of people get work from their platforms. So really important for you to understand, it's up to you to build your brand. It's up to you to define your expertise. It's up to you to build your network. It's up to you to have the business skills and the business knowledge that Rachel was just talking about to set yourself up to be successful. At the end of the day, all that a platform is a marketplace that connects buyers and sellers. And at the end of the day, it's up to you to turn that opportunity into a real sale. And you got to be helping the platform to do that. You can't count on the platform to do it for you.
And can I add a piece to this, a hashtag girl boss kind of theme?
Go for it.
And I see this with a lot of women, and I experience this personally. The other piece is understand your value. When I first started out my company, again and again and again, I would underprice my services. And I think it's something that women struggle with more than men. I'm not going to play that card, but I think, with us, we feel like we've got to get 90% of the project, and we have to know 90% of, before we go in. A guy would be like, I know 20%. I'm like a rock star. I'm going to go. And we have consultants that are male, and I see that behavioral shift. So I think for any women out there, you absolutely are worth it, and understand your value and demand it. consistently.
That is so important. And may I add one other piece?
Yeah.
And it is, there are some organizations that we call business in a box. One is wethos.co, another is collective.com, another is honeybook.com. One of the things that is true increasingly for these folks is they actually have data on success in rates. And so, Terri, your point is, what would happen if I increased, if I may use your point, what would happen if I increased my rate by 15%? Would I lose business, or would I keep business, or would I in fact gain business? And we're finding smarter, more intelligent platforms that are actually able to help people with that stuff, which is super
I
important.
love that. I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
That's amazing. And from I had a question on, you know, the alternative methods and marketplaces and platforms. Does this help the independent contractor and the organization mitigate risk, right? Is this one of those solutions to mitigate the compliance concerns, the risk concerns? Fitz, I want to toss that to you.
Yeah, I mean, I love entrepreneurship. I think it's wonderful, and folks should absolutely give it a shot. With entrepreneurship comes understanding your worth and protecting that, not underselling yourself. And the reason why these really experienced large companies have these onerous requirements is because, as a backdrop to that type of enthusiasm and optimism, they understand that sometimes things go wrong and they are looking to protect themselves. And I would say to ICs that are just starting off, absolutely do it and absolutely value yourself. So when these large companies are saying danger, 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 there's something here that you need to be careful about. You might want to listen, because they've got a 30,000 foot perspective and years of experience that puts them in that position. Trust me, they would love nothing else than to reduce every single barrier to engaging with you in a Wild West kind of, manner. But there are reasons why that can't happen. And those are warning signs that the IC should really be careful about. And typically the things that they require, I'll add, fall into 3 categories. Those things that are required by law, those things that are required in contract, and then those things that you probably want to have on a voluntary basis because you're protecting yourself. So look at it and consider it from those different perspectives as well.
Thanks, Fitz. Rachel, any comments, thoughts on
No,
that?
that's pretty perfect. Because from the HR realm of things, we have to negotiate those contracts with the clients. And so, yes, things that aren't necessarily mandated by law, you do have to comply because they're mandated by the client that you need to do the business for. And for a one-person independent contractor, getting to all those requirements that client requires as far as all the insurance coverages, that might be impossible for you to, have a $10 million policy limit on, one of their policies. And that's kind of where this ecosystem and myBasePay steps in, because myBasePay does have those overarching policies. But of course, this is risk management. So as the independent contractor, they also still have to maintain their own policies. They just don't have to have them in the same extent as that client contract would require. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty details that, but I think most of all in this industry, I used to be in like the utility industry, which was very different feeling for the type of people you work with. But I think this group, and usually the conversations that we have, everybody's trying to help everybody figure it out. There's nobody trying to just, say, no, we absolutely don't want you to work if you're not a perfectly aligned paperwork business. No, everybody's like, oh, okay, I understand you just now getting started, let me refer you here, 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 and let's get you, where you need to be. So I don't think that any of these barriers should scare somebody in trying to start their own business. Just ask, and people, all of us willingly tell you what we need in order to facilitate it. So
Can I add two things to that wonderful list that both Fitz and Rachel and of course Terry mentioned? Two things. One is, remember that even though people are saying freelancing is on the rise, independent contractors are getting plenty of work, it's lumpy out there. So make sure that you understand that, for example, if you're doing AI or robotics or machine learning, you're going to get lots of opportunity. If you're a writer trying to do copy, it's not as easy. So very important to understand the reality of your market. Don't think in terms of freelancing as a generalized market. Understand it in terms of the specific skills that you're offering, and make sure that the skills that you're offering are those that are needed. Who's interested in somebody that's just another one of 1,000x? So distinguish yourself, differentiate yourself. One little example, and I'll go one more point. There's Shalon Roth is a wonderful writer who has a British platform called PRIT. She is a writer, but she is a writer for the pharma industry. And so she has built expertise that's very strong, that's ongoing. She's built networks. So she gets a lot of work because she is an expert in that particular segment. Try to create that expertise. Try to create a moat, as Buffett would call, around your skill. The second thing is what we always tell our kids, and that is you can be a buyer or a seller. What are you? If you're a buyer, you think that your work is valuable, you think your time is valuable, and you're looking for the best place to deploy it. If you're a seller, you're just hoping to get a date. Don't be a seller, be a buyer. Because as you do that and demonstrate that, that will drive you to do the other things that you need to do right. Like be clear about what companies deserve your time, like being clear about your expertise, like insisting on conditions that inaugurate your success. So for what it's worth.
Love that, John. Well said.
Yeah, well said, John. And this is a perfect segue to transition into closing thoughts for this conversation. So I'll toss it to Terry in terms of, what will be your number one takeaway from this conversation as it relates to both organizations and individuals to leverage this growing trend of contingent workers?
Well, I think for both sides of the equation, for the ICs and the solopreneurs that want to strike out on their own, that this is a viable path for you, that there is a support and an ecosystem around you to help enable that. And we're continuing to help organizations embrace you, and they want to bring you in. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to help the organizations get past maybe some of these outdated paradigms and these outdated employment constructs and kind of embrace where we are.
Love that. Rachel?
Yeah, pretty much along the same lines. I know it's complex and I know it can be scary, but this is happening. It's been happening and it's going to continue to happen. So instead of just trying to put your head in a hole and just maybe stick to that full-time permanent position because you feel comfortable there are other avenues. I know we spoke about loyalty earlier, and honestly, nowadays, more than ever, layoffs, there is no permanent positions. Even if you have a full-time labeled permanent position, the moment that skill set is no longer needed, they'll cut you. So it's just kind of how it needs to be. And it's just this mindset set of the worker understanding that they can cut and shift companies that easily as well. So if you don't know how to navigate it, then find somebody who does, either from the client side, finding the right vendor to help facilitate the compliance side of this, or from the consultant side, finding the right, partnerships and businesses that can help you, get yourself set up correctly.
Thank you, Rachel. And last but not least, Fitz.
Well, I think that Rachel hit the nail on the head there. There are, from the IC perspective, it's a wonderful time to be out there. The labor market is in your favor. Give it a shot. I think it's exhilarating. It's contagious. Go get some. On your way, we all need help. And the platforms that you choose to work with, the network that you lean into, be sure to ask them how they plan to help you. How do they plan to help you navigate through this labyrinth of compliance and nutty insurance requirements? The answer to that how will help you select partners that will ultimately drive your success. And for the enterprise client, it's the same, but in reverse. We understand that you need to engage labor on terms that are necessary. We understand that you are that you have some very tight labor shortage issues. I would ask existing partners what they can do to alleviate that, and look to diversify those labor channels a bit to allow for some creative thought to enter the mix.
Thank you, Fitz, and thank you, everybody, Terry, Rachel, John, for
Welcome.
coming together and having this great conversation around independent contractors, contingent workforce, although we don't like to use that term. I know, John, I got you. But yeah, so the idea here is to set the foundation for to continue this conversation, doing a webinar in the future where we can dive deeper into a specific topic. So if you're there listening to this episode, and if you have any feedback, questions, or comments, please let us know, because that will help us guide our co-creation for future events like this, or webinar, or other collaborations. But for now, just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for the collaboration. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us,
Thank
Caesar.
you.
Wonderful
Thank you for
job,
having
and
us.
thank you to
Thank you, Caesar. How do we get one of those T-shirts?
I will get you, everybody. Let's go.
Free swag. Yay!
Yeah, free swag. That's right.